Welcome, dear dreamer. And tonight, we wander into a realm where myth breathes softly through ancient cedar groves, and where the sacred deer of Nara move with the quiet grace of beings touched by the divine. Their steps echo stories older than emperors, older than shrines, older than the very stones that line the forest paths. Here, beneath lantern-lit branches and prayer-soaked roofs of Kasuga Taisha, harmony is not a lesson, it is a presence. A gentle truth carried in every calm gaze, every bowing gesture, every moment when nature and spirit meet without fear. These deer do not merely inhabit the sacred world, they help define it, bridging earth and kami with effortless stillness. Before we continue, tell me, what small nightly rituals help you drift into sleep more peacefully? Share them with me. I would truly love to read them all. And if these quiet journeys through myth and memory bring you comfort, feel free to subscribe, so we can keep wandering through stories like this together. Long before the modern world shaped roads and borders, long before lanterns lined the pathways of Nara Park, the land that would one day become Japan's ancient capital lay quiet beneath the breath of unbroken forests. Here, mountains rolled like the backs of sleeping gods, rivers whispered over smooth stones, and the wind carried secrets from one cedar to the next. In these early centuries, before temples rose and emperors sent their envoys across the realm, the beings who guarded the land were not human. They were spirits, forces, and creatures whose presence shaped the world with silent intention. Among these guardians, the deer stood apart. They moved through the forests like soft shadows given form, delicate, watchful, almost luminous in the morning light. Long before any shrine keeper lit incense, and before any priest recited ritual words, the people believed the animals who roamed the land were touched by the unseen. Birds, foxes, cranes, and serpents all carried the breath of kami, yet it was the deer who seemed closest to heaven itself. Their presence was gentle but profound, as if each step affirmed a promise between nature and spirit. As the centuries unfolded, the land that would become Nara drew the attention of rulers and priests. It was here that the early Yamato court sought a place to build a center of power and faith, a capital worthy of the divine lineage they believed guided their reign. They chose the basin beneath Mount Wakakusa, a place where mists rose like prayers and the wind carried a strange calm. It was said that the mountains themselves bowed softly when the decision was made, whispering approval through rustling leaves. But a capital could not rise without divine protection. A new era required a guardian, a kami who would stand at the threshold between heaven and earth to watch over throne and nation. And so the rulers called upon Take Mikazuchi, the thunder deity known for his fierce strength, unyielding clarity, and celestial authority. His presence once shaped storms. Now they wished him to shape destiny. The myth says he did not walk into Nara, he arrived riding a white deer. It was a moment that would echo through centuries, carved into memory like a scar that became sacred. The legend tells that Take Mikazuchi descended upon Mount Mikasa, near the future site of Kasuga Taisha Shrine, seated upon the deer's back as though light itself had taken form in gentle hooves. When the people saw the divine messenger step onto the earth, calm and radiant, they bowed in reverence. It was not the thunder that commanded awe, but the quiet presence of the creature that bore him. This single image, a god arriving not with violence but with grace, shaped the heart of Nara forever. Where the deity walked, temples would rise. Where the deer stepped, sanctity would bloom. The people understood then that the deer were not mere animals. They were messengers, bridges between the mortal world and the realm of the kami. Their bodies carried kindness, their eyes carried ancient calm, and their presence reminded all who approached that nature was not only landscape, it was the living garment of divinity. As Nara grew into a capital, the deer walked freely through its pathways, protected by belief itself. No blade could touch them, for to harm a messenger was unthinkable. No gate barred them, for their movement was considered sacred. Even when palace walls rose and temple bells began to echo across the land, the deer remained entwined with the identity of the place, silent companions to priests, watchers of ceremonies, and gentle guardians of the forested slopes. People believed the kami listened through them. When a deer paused outside a shrine, it was regarded as a sign. When a young one approached a visitor, it meant blessings might follow. And when the herd moved in unison, it was said the gods were speaking through their steps. Over generations, the legend deepened. Stories emerged of deer appearing in visions, guiding lost travelers, or standing by priests as omens of protection. Children grew up hearing that the deer could sense one's heart, that they could bow not from training, but from instinct shaped by centuries of closeness to the divine. Even emperors saw them as sacred companions. Poems were written, songs composed, paintings brushed with reverence for the creatures whose presence made Nara more than a city. It made it a threshold to the spiritual world. In the forests surrounding Kasuga Taisha, the deer became part of the landscape's blessing. Their silhouettes among the trees were considered signs that Take Mikazuchi's protection still lingered. The priests tended to them gently, and the people offered food not as charity, but as devotion. Travelers bowed to them as they would to deities, and in return, the deer walked without fear among humans. The myth continued through storms and seasons. Even when dynasties shifted, when capitals moved, when time reshaped the nation, the deer remained, not only in the forest, but in the collective memory of Japan. Their presence outlasted war and peace, grief and celebration. They endured through eras of poetry, eras of iron, eras of woodblock prints and ink manuscripts. And through it all, the image of Take Mikazuchi arriving upon a deer remained at the heart of Nara's sacred identity. The story spread through travelers and monks who visited the shrines. They carried tales of the divine messenger who once walked the land, of the deer whose calm reflected heaven, of forests where earth and spirit touched. And the more the story traveled, the more the deer became not just guardians of Nara, but guardians of Japan's relationship with nature itself. For in Shinto belief, every being carries a trace of the divine. But some beings, some rare, luminous beings, carry it with unmistakable clarity. And in Nara, those beings walked quietly beside humans, reminding them that harmony was not a dream but a living possibility. When evening settled upon the shrine and lanterns flickered to life, the deer often gathered near the gates, as if drawn by the soft glow. People whispered that they were listening, that the kami spoke through firelight and rustling leaves, and the deer heard it first. The shrine priests did not dismiss such thoughts. They simply smiled, knowing that mystery is not meant to be solved, but honored. Thus the legend of Nara's sacred deer was not one moment, not one myth, but a continuous breath, beginning with a god riding down a mountain and continuing through every generation that has walked gently among them since. And even now, when modern footsteps echo through Nara Park and cameras capture what once only poems described, the deer still hold the same quiet dignity. They bow, they listen, they move with grace untouched by time. For their origins lie not in the present world, but in the moment heaven touched earth on the back of a silent, sacred messenger. As the tale of Take Mikazuchi's descent settled into the memory of Nara, the people began to understand that they did not live merely beside nature. They lived within a sacred presence, shaped by unseen hands. The deer who wandered the forests and temple grounds were no longer creatures to be observed from afar. They were threads woven into the fabric of the land's spiritual identity. Their movements guided the rhythm of the early capital. Their calm presence lent assurance, and their silent steps became a reminder that the divine often arrives quietly, in forms gentle enough to kneel beside. With time, these deer became symbols not of a single moment, but of a lineage of trust between humans and kami. They walked beside priests as though accompanying rituals with their own wordless prayer. They appeared at ceremonies with such regularity that many believed they were drawn by more than scent or curiosity, that some hidden echo of Take Mikazuchi lingered in each generation, calling them to the shrine as if responding to a memory older than flesh. Their presence during sacred festivals was considered an omen of harmony, and their absence, on rare occasions, stirred concern that something in the balance between heaven and earth had shifted. When Kasuga Taisha Shrine rose in honor of the deity and his protective spirit, the deer were not merely inhabitants of the surrounding forest, they were companions to its creation. Builders often paused when deer approached, bowing subtly or whispering prayers, fearful of disrupting beings who lived so close to divinity. It was said that the construction went smoothly because the deer accepted the presence of humans, because they understood instinctively that the shrine, too, was born from reverence. And when the great cedar trees around the shrine were bound with sacred rope, marking them as vessels of spirit, the deer stood beneath them without fear, as though recognizing kinship in holiness. Generations passed. Dynasties shifted. Political centers moved. Yet the deer endured as symbols of a moment when the divine stepped directly onto the land. Parents told their children that the deer carried memories of that first descent, that in their eyes one could see the sky as it appeared on the day Take Mikazuchi arrived. And children, in their innocence, often believed they saw something more than reflection when they looked into the deer's dark, still gaze. As these beliefs took root, laws emerged protecting the animals with the weight of divine decree. To harm a deer was not only taboo, it was an offense against the kami themselves. Stories spread of tragedies that befell those who disregarded this sacred rule. Harvests that failed, bridges that collapsed, storms that arrived without warning. Whether these tales were truth or fear, none dared to test the boundary. And so, through reverence and caution alike, the deer lived unharmed, moving among people as though belonging to both worlds at once. The priests of Kasuga Taisha cultivated rituals around the deer, acknowledging their role in the spiritual landscape. Offerings were made not only to the shrine, but to the animals who embodied its presence. When the deer bowed their heads in return, a gesture that would later become famous, the people accepted it as a sign of divine acknowledgement. The priests never claimed to understand precisely why the deer bowed. They simply said that in places where kami dwell closely, even animals learn the language of reverence. As Nara entered its golden age, poets and scholars traveled from distant provinces to witness the sacred deer firsthand. They walked through the forest paths where morning mist curled around trunks like drifting memory. They watched deer gather near lantern-lined corridors, their silhouettes soft against the glow. Many wrote of the experience as if describing a dream, a world where nature itself felt awake and watching, where silence carried wisdom and even the smallest movement felt intentional. One poet described the deer as the hush between thunder and blessing, suggesting that they embodied both power and peace. Another wrote that seeing a deer step from behind a cedar tree was like watching the first breath of the world. These words spread across the archipelago, strengthening the reputation of Nara as a place where the sacred was not merely believed in, it was lived. Travelers who journeyed to the capital often brought home stories of deer approaching them without fear, resting near their feet or walking in slow, thoughtful patterns beside the roads. Some believed the deer could sense intention. They bowed to those who arrived with pure hearts and kept distance from those whose minds were troubled. Whether truth or poetry, these tales shaped a cultural reverence that no decree could enforce and no authority could weaken. In the centuries that followed, as the city around Nara transformed, the deer remained constant. They were seen during imperial processions, drifting like soft shadows between the legs of horses and the hems of silk garments. They appeared in temple art, painted in gold and vermilion, carved into wood, inked into folding screens that depicted the ancient myth. They stood as quiet guardians in stories of the realm's founding, and their presence in the capital's memory survived through periods of peace and turmoil alike. During quiet nights at Kasuga, when priests lit lanterns for ceremonies honoring ancestral spirits, the deer often gathered near the shrine's outer torii gates. Their forms, outlined by the flickering glow, appeared almost otherworldly, as though reminders that the world had once witnessed a god descending upon their ancestors. In those moments, worshippers felt the boundary between ages blur, as if listening to the echo of Take Mikazuchi's arrival moving through the forest wind. Even when the capital shifted away from Nara, the deer did not lose their meaning. They remained in the forests, walking paths laid centuries before, watching generations of pilgrims who still came seeking connection. To some, the deer were symbols of nostalgia, of a world simpler and more attuned to spirit. To others, they were evidence of a divine lineage that did not fade even as eras changed. Their endurance itself became mythology, a quiet lesson in how sacredness survives when held with gentleness. Of all the stories told about the deer, one of the most enduring speaks of a moment when a young monk, overwhelmed by doubt about his place in the world, wandered into the forest. There, a single deer approached him and bowed deeply, lingering as if waiting for him to respond. The monk, moved beyond words, returned to the temple with a renewed heart, believing the kami had spoken through the animal. The tale circulated for generations, not to elevate the monk, but to remind all who heard it that divinity speaks in ways subtle enough for only the quiet to hear. The deer of Nara, through their serene presence, embodied a truth older than any shrine or scroll. That nature itself is a voice of the sacred, and that harmony between humanity and the divine begins with humility. Their legend did not grow because they were rare or powerful, but because they represented a relationship between worlds that too easily drifts into forgetfulness. As the centuries continued and the world modernized around them, the deer remained as they had always been. Calm, unhurried, as if walking within a time untouched by haste. They reminded visitors that even in a world of change, some things are meant to endure exactly as they are. They reminded priests that the divine speaks softly. They reminded children that the sacred lives not only in grand temples, but in the gentle eyes of creatures who trust without fear. Thus, the origins of the Nara deer legend are not contained in one moment, one myth, or one tale. They are carried in the forests, in the shrines, in the footsteps that echo through mossy paths, in the hearts of those who pause to bow in return. They are alive in every deer that crosses the threshold of Kasuga, in every traveler who lowers their gaze in reverence, in every breath of wind that passes between cedar branches above. For the sacred does not announce itself with thunder. It arrives quietly on soft hooves and waits for those who know how to listen. Far from the wide roads of modern cities, Nara's sacred landscape unfolds like a living memory, a place where trees lean into centuries and the earth breathes with the quiet patience of old spirits. The forests here do not simply surround the temples, they hold them, cradle them, protect them. And within that embrace, the sacred deer wander as though continuing a conversation the land began long before human footsteps arrived. This is the world where nature and worship do not stand apart, but rise together like twin pillars holding the sky. If the legend of Take Mikazuchi gave the deer their divine origin, it was the ancient forests and shrines of Nara that offered them a home woven from reverence itself. Long before any visitor fed them a cracker or captured their image with a camera, the deer moved through these groves with a stillness that felt old as myth. Their forms emerged between trunks like drifting spirits, soft and deliberate, as though the very paths belonged to them first. And truthfully, in the eyes of the people, they always did. The heart of this sacred landscape lies around Kasuga, the grand shrine built in honor of the deity who first descended upon the back of a deer. rising from the forest floor in soft vermilion hues. Its buildings gleam against the deep green of ancient cedars and cryptomeria. Lanterns line its pathways by the thousands stone lanterns worn smooth by centuries of rain, and hanging lanterns sculpted with patterns of clouds, animals, and divine symbols. During daylight, they stand like guardians. At night, they glow like memories refusing to fade. These lanterns were not created for spectacle alone. Each one was an offering, a prayer in physical form, entrusted to the flickering light that guided spirits through forest dusk. And as people lit them, they often found deer resting nearby, heads bowed, eyes half closed as though attending the ritual. To witness such moments was to understand why the deer were seen not as animals wandering through human space, but as companions of the shrine, moving with a grace that belonged entirely to the sacred. Beyond the shrine, the forest spreads in layered shades of green, every branch heavy with age. Moss climbs across roots with the slow devotion of centuries. Ferns unfurl like small prayers whispered to the earth. Sunlight falls in narrow beams through the dense canopy, touching the forest floor in brief golden moments before vanishing again into shadow. It is a landscape that teaches patience, where nothing rushes, where nothing forgets its place in the grand, breathing whole. As the seasons turn, Nara Park transforms with a kind of ceremonial beauty. In spring, cherry blossoms drift through the air like pale snowfall, settling on the backs of deer who continue on without pause. By summer, greenery deepens into a sanctuary of shade, a cool refuge for both animals and pilgrims. Autumn paints the forest in 100 warm hues, maple red, ginkgo gold, and the deer walk among fallen leaves as though moving through a dream of firelight. Winter brings quiet elegance, with frost resting on wooden torii and the deer's breath rising in faint clouds that seem to mingle with the breath of the forest, spirits themselves. Paths wind gently through this landscape, merging with the curves of the land rather than carving through it. These paths were laid not with the intention of conquering nature, but of respecting it. Stepping onto them is like stepping into an older time, a time when humans built with humility, seeking harmony rather than mastery. Pilgrims walking these paths often find deer stepping alongside them, matching their rhythm as though guiding them deeper into the fold of the sacred. The temples and shrines scattered throughout Nara Park reflect different layers of devotion. Kasuga Taisha is the brightest, with its red pillars and shining roofs, but beyond it lie smaller sub-shrines hidden among trees and stone steps. Some are tucked behind clusters of lanterns. Others sit atop slopes where deer gather in quiet circles, their bodies forming shapes that seem almost ritualistic in their calm. Each shrine holds its own kami, its own story, its own whisper of the past, yet all are united by the forest, by the land, and by the deer who move freely among them. The relationship between the forest and the deer is more than coexistence, it is interwoven fate. The animals navigate the groves with intimate knowledge, following paths unseen by human eyes. They pause before certain trees, as if recognizing them as the homes of kami. They gather in clearings where sunlight falls softly, as though honoring places where divine presence settles more deeply. The people who have observed them over generations say that the deer know where the sacred flows strongest, that they can feel the quiet currents of spiritual energy that linger in roots and stones. For the people of ancient Nara, this forest was not wilderness. It was a sanctuary shaped by divine intent. The deer's presence only confirmed what they already believed, that here, boundaries between the seen and unseen were thin. A single moment, a deer stepping from behind a cedar into a shaft of light, could feel like a revelation. A traveler hearing the distant clack of hooves on stone could feel suddenly humbled, reminded of the myth that gave this place its soul. And a priest sweeping fallen leaves before a shrine gate might pause, sensing that he was not working alone, but within the enduring companionship of the forest's silent guardians. As Nara grew into a capital, its people built palaces and courts, roads and gates. Yet even then, the forest was respected as a sacred presence. No structure rose too close to the heart of the grove, and pathways were curved rather than straight to honor the flow of spiritual currents. The deer walked through palace courtyards without fear. They strolled past government buildings as though inspecting the work of humans with quiet patience. It was said that if a deer paused before a building's threshold, it signaled divine approval. If it turned away, the structure required purification or change. To visitors arriving from distant provinces, this sight was unforgettable. Elegant deer moving freely through city spaces, treated not as intruders but as honored guests. When they asked why the animals wandered without restraint, the people answered simply, "Because they are the messengers of the kami. We build around them, never against them." Even now, the layout of Nara Park reflects this ancient belief. Roads curve gently around clusters of trees. Bridges rise over streams left undisturbed. Shrines and small altars nestled within the forest appear almost accidentally discovered, as though placed by unseen hands rather than human architects. And everywhere, the deer remain, walking softly, bowing gently, grazing beneath lanterns that have witnessed centuries. By the time the Heian period flourished, the sacredness of Nara's forest had infused art and literature. Court poets wrote verses comparing deer to moonlit spirits. Painters created scrolls depicting deer resting beneath pine branches, their bodies outlined in gentle ink strokes that carried reverence in every line. These images traveled through the country, reinforcing the idea that Nara's deer were not merely animals. They were spiritual symbols, living reminders of divine and earthly harmony. Even ritual festivals reflected this connection. During lantern festivals at Kasuga Taisha, glowing lights illuminated the forest paths as if awakening memories of Take Mikazuchi's descent. Deer often wandered the edges of these ceremonies, their silhouettes merging with the glow, creating scenes so serene that witnesses felt time slow around them. Some believe the kami themselves watched through the deer's eyes during these nights, blessing the gathering through silent presence. Through every era of Japan's shifting history, Nara's forest has remained steady, rooted in reverence. While human life changed, while capitals moved, dynasties rose and fell, and wars reshaped the land, the forest and its deer maintained a continuity that soothed the nation's memory. They remained unhurried, unconcerned with power or progress, living embodiments of a world where harmony was not aspiration, but truth. To walk in Nara Park today is to feel that ancient harmony still alive. Even with modern footsteps and distant echoes of travel, the forest keeps its character, shaded, gentle, listening. Deer graze near shrines where prayers are offered daily. Paths still wind softly beneath trees that have watched over the land for 1,000 years. And with each step taken through the park, one senses a presence both timeless and intimate, carried in the breath of leaves, in the rustle of fur, in the quiet hush of spiritual memory. For in this place, the sacred does not stand apart from the earthly. It stands beside it, walks among it, and breathes through it, most clearly, most tenderly, through the deer who still move like living prayers beneath the canopy of Nara's ancient forest. As centuries unfolded over Nara's sacred basin, the forest did not change its nature, it changed its voice. The rustle of leaves that once greeted ancient priests became the same quiet greeting offered to pilgrims of later ages. The moss that spread across stones in the era of emperors thickened through ages of poets, and again through eras when the world outside knew conflict. Yet through every shift, the forest held its tone, gentle, patient, and aware. It listened always with the calm of something that knew it belonged to more than time alone. The deer remained its constant companions. Every generation saw them walk the same paths, as if guided by instinct older than lineage. When morning light washed over the shrines, The deer would often stand in small gatherings, their heads lifted toward the soft glow slipping through the canopy. They seemed to breathe with the forest, to wake with it, to rest with it, not apart from it, but as part of its pulse. Travelers who observed them felt as though they had stepped into a story, one where nature and divinity merged so seamlessly that the borders between them dissolved like mist. Over time, the relationship between forest, deer, and shrine deepened into a harmony that shaped the identity of Nara itself. Visitors approached the area not merely to see architecture or landscapes, but to feel the presence that lingered in every branch and stone. They came seeking something quiet, a softness the modern world seldom offered, a reminder of an era when humanity looked to nature not for conquest, but for understanding. Within the forest, certain trees grew so ancient that they seemed to hold memories in their bark. The priests regarded these trees with reverence, tying sacred ropes around their trunks to mark them as vessels of spirit. These ropes, woven with strips of white paper that fluttered gently in the wind, signaled that the kami might dwell within, resting in the same shade as the deer who wandered beneath. When people saw a deer resting at the base of such a tree, they lowered their voices, stepping slowly as if approaching a holy threshold. In these woods, silence was never empty. It was filled with presence, the whisper of wind, the soft crackle of leaves under hooves, the distant chime of a shrine bell. To walk the forest was to walk beside centuries of devotion, a feeling that settled around visitors like a cloak woven from history and faith. Even the light seemed different here, filtered through layers of branches that had witnessed countless prayers. One of the most cherished paths wound up toward Mount Wakakusa. As travelers ascended, the forest thinned and opened into gentle slopes overlooking the city below. Deer often appeared along the trail, their forms framed by the sky, as if guiding those who climbed with humility. From the hillside, the view of the ancient capital stretched outward. Temples nestled in greenery, shrines glimmering with vermilion, the forest folding around them like a protective mantle. For many centuries, pilgrims climbed this mountain believing that from such height one could better hear the whispers of the divine. And often, as they paused to rest, a deer would approach, standing close without fear. Even the quiet companionship of such a moment carried spiritual weight, as though the land itself had offered reassurance. But the true heart of forest and shrine lay in the lantern paths of Kasuga Taisha. During festivals, when thousands of lanterns were lit, the forest transformed into a realm suspended between worlds. The warm glow of flame illuminated the curve of branches, the carved faces of stone guardians, and the delicate movements of deer stepping softly between pillars of light. Those who witnessed such nights often described them as moments where time paused, where the forest seemed to inhale and exhale in rhythm with the lantern's gentle flicker. The deer appeared like silhouettes made of dusk and memory, drifting through the glow with unhurried elegance. Their shadows stretched long across the ground, mingling with lantern light in ways that made them seem more spirit than creature. Some said that on these nights, the deer carried the prayers of the people to the kami, their movements guiding offerings into the unseen world. Others believed the deer listened, that the flame-lit forest allowed them to hear the intentions of human hearts more clearly. Whether truth or story, the faith remained. The forest listened through the deer. As centuries turned, the shrines and temples throughout Nara Park became resting points for countless rituals. Priests swept the grounds in the early hours, brushing fallen leaves from stone steps worn smooth by thousands of footsteps. Deer often appeared during this work, watching the priests with eyes deep and calm, as though recognizing the rhythm of sacred maintenance. Sometimes they lingered, lowering their heads in quiet acknowledgement. The priests never shooed them away. They moved around them, honoring the presence of beings who had walked with the kami themselves. There were shrines hidden deeper in the forest, accessible by narrow paths that twisted through layers of shade. These small altars, dedicated to lesser-known kami, carried a different stillness, one that felt intimate, almost secret. Here, deer were often seen grazing or resting, their bodies forming part of the sacred space as naturally as the stone markers and wooden plaques. Pilgrims who discovered such places felt as if they had stumbled upon a hidden moment, meant only for those who walked slowly enough to find it. In these secluded groves, offerings were simple: a candle, a folded prayer, a handful of rice. And often, before a pilgrim could finish their silent gesture, a deer would appear, stepping softly between trees. This closeness, this effortless mingling of worship and nature, became one of the defining experiences of Nara. It reminded all who visited that the divine does not only dwell in grand temples, it dwells where humanity meets the earth with humility. As the world beyond grew louder, faster, filled with wars, reformations, and modernizations, Nara's forest remained steady. Roads were built, but they bent respectfully around sacred groves. Cities expanded, but few dared to disturb Nara's ancient trees. Each generation seemed to understand intuitively that this forest was not merely landscape, it was legacy. Even when Japan entered eras of profound transformation, as industrialization swept across the nation, the deer continued to walk the paths beside shrines, unburdened by the world's acceleration. They grazed beside tourist paths and temple steps, as calm as they had been when emperors prayed in these woods. Their presence became a gesture of continuity, a reminder that no matter how much changes, some truths remain untouched. There were stories of travelers who arrived seeking peace from the rush of modern life. They wandered the forest until they found themselves standing still, watching a single deer nibble pine needles beside a stone lantern. In that moment, the noise of the world receded. The forest exhaled. And the traveler understood why generations had come here seeking not answers, but quiet. For what Nara's forest teaches is not doctrine, not instruction, but presence. It teaches that the sacred can be as gentle as a deer's breath, as simple as a leaf falling onto a shrine's wooden step, as soft as a lantern's glow trembling in the breeze. At dusk, when the sky fades into indigo and the temple roofs darken, the deer gather again. They walk among the shadows with an ancient ease, their steps soundless on the forest floor. The trees sway lightly as if greeting them. The lanterns shimmer faintly, and in that hour when day leans into night, the forest becomes a place where myth feels near enough to touch. For in Nara, the sacred is not remembered. It is lived through forest, through shrine, through the quiet, enduring footsteps of the deer who wander there still. Long before Japan shaped itself into provinces and capitals, long before shrines rose along sacred paths and rituals flowed through the seasons like quiet rivers, there lived a belief older than ink and stone, the belief that every breath of the natural world carried spirit. Mountains were not merely mountains, they were thrones of unseen presence. Rivers were not merely water, they were threads of life woven by divine intention. And animals, moving freely through forests and fields, were not creatures separate from humanity, but companions who walked closer to the realm of the kami than any human could hope to. This understanding was not taught through scrolls or doctrine. It emerged in the way a fox's eyes glimmered in twilight, in the flight of cranes across winter sky, in the gentle stillness of deer beneath cedar branches. People looked upon these beings and recognized in their presence a holiness that needed no explanation. In Shinto, the sacred is not distant or unreachable. It is intertwined with the living world, found in the quiet places where nature breathes without effort. Among the many beings who walked beside the kami, the deer held a place of particular reverence. Their movements were soft, deliberate, as if shaped by the deeper rhythms of the land itself. When they stepped through forests or paused beside shrine gates, it seemed as though they carried echoes of something ancient, a memory older than any human lineage. And so people believed that the deer, like foxes, serpents, cranes, and other honored creatures, were messengers of the divine. walking threads connecting the spiritual world to the human one. In the heart of Shinto thought lies a simple truth, that the divine is not above nature, but within it. Kami dwell in stones, in waterfalls, in wind-bent branches, in sunlight spilling across moss. They dwell in mountains that seem to breathe with silent dignity, and in clearings where the world feels as if it is holding its breath. And just as Kami inhabit the land, they also move through the creatures who live closest to its quietest places. Animals, in this belief, are not vessels of randomness. They are aware, attentive, sensitive to the currents of spiritual presence. They see what humans forget to see. They listen to the things humans do not hear. They walk paths that human feet have long forgotten, carrying wisdom that exists beyond words. When people observed deer in the forests around Nara, they sensed this connection. The animals did not fear the shrines. They moved among them with familiarity, with grace. They approached priests as though recognizing something in their robes, something in their careful steps. Sometimes the deer bowed before receiving food, a gesture that seemed less like training and more like instinct, an echo of reverence shaped by centuries of proximity to divine presence. And what is instinct, if not the memory of a deeper world? The more people watched the deer, the more they understood that these animals were not ordinary. They paused before sacred trees, lingered near altars, stood still during ceremonies as though listening. In their silence, there was language. In their gaze, there was comprehension. Their calm felt like a kind of blessing, a reminder that the sacred does not always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it speaks through gentleness. To understand, Shinto is to accept that the lines between the physical and the spiritual are thin. A shrine is not a boundary, it is a doorway. A forest is not a wilderness, it is a sanctuary. A deer is not a creature living beside humanity, it is a companion sharing the land under the same divine sky. And in this understanding, every movement becomes meaningful. Every presence becomes part of a greater harmony. The concept of yorishiro, objects or beings capable of attracting kami, plays a deep role in these beliefs. A deer, wandering freely through holy groves, becomes such a vessel. Its body, its breath, its stillness are all aligned with the currents of sacred presence. When a kami chooses to approach the human world, it might do so through a deer, allowing that animal's gaze to carry a message, allowing its path to guide a traveler, allowing its presence to shift the quiet of the forest in ways that stir understanding in the heart. This is why harming such animals was unthinkable. To raise a hand against a messenger was to risk severing the delicate bond between humans and the divine. It was to break trust not only with the deer, but with the land itself. And so, from early centuries onward, the deer of Nara were not merely protected by law, they were protected by belief. People watched over them with the same care they offered sacred groves or cherished altars, knowing that these beings moved through the world bearing meaning none should dare disturb. In the minds of the ancient people, animals were not lesser than humans. They were closer to the source of creation. They lived without the noise of ambition or fear, navigating the world with instinct shaped by the spirits who moved through rivers and trees. Humans needed rituals, prayers, and shrines to draw near to the kami, but animals, especially the sacred ones, lived beside them without effort. This belief deepened across centuries. When storms came, people watched how animals moved, believing they sensed the intentions of the sky. When natural disasters threatened, they looked for signs in the forests, trusting that sacred creatures understood shifts in the unseen world. And when priests sought guidance, they sometimes followed the paths of foxes, cranes, or deer, interpreting their behavior as quiet messages. In this way, animals became spiritual intermediaries, not because they spoke aloud, but because their presence resonated with a clarity humans rarely possessed. Their lives were woven tightly into the fabric of nature, and therefore into the fabric of the divine. For Nara, this connection took a unique shape. The deer did not wander far from the shrine grounds, as though the land itself was their chosen cradle. Visitors noticed this and believed the animals were bound to the kami by more than legend, that the sacred places fed their spirits, that they returned again and again because they belonged to the shrine as much as the shrine belonged to them. The deer walked in patterns that echoed the movement of priests during ceremonies. They rested near the hydrangea gardens where prayers hung from wooden plaques. They gathered beneath lanterns during festivals as if participating in rituals alongside humans. When children approached with food or curiosity, the deer moved softly, bowing their heads in gestures that felt as old as myth. Some said the deer bowed to show respect for the offerings. Others believed they bowed because they recognized the divine spark within each person. The truth, like all Shinto truths, lived somewhere deeper, in the space where symbols and instincts meet, where the unseen world moves through the seen one with quiet elegance. Even in the modern age, the deer's presence in Nara carries this spiritual weight. Tourists may arrive without knowing the legend, without understanding the centuries of belief, yet when they step into the forest and see a deer resting beside a shrine pillar, something shifts in their understanding. Silence grows gentler, light feels softer, the air seems to listen. It is the same feeling ancient people knew, the feeling of standing near a being who carries more than its body, more than its breath, more than its soft footsteps on moss. For the deer of Nara are not simply animals. They are living threads connecting humanity to the divine, moving through forests that remember every prayer ever whispered beneath their branches. And in their presence, even the unspoken becomes sacred. As Shinto belief matured through the centuries, the understanding of animals as spiritual intermediaries deepened in ways that touched nearly every aspect of daily life. The world was not divided between sacred and ordinary. It was layered, fluid, intertwined. Spirits could be felt in the rustling of bamboo, in the hush of wind moving through pine branches, in the way water shimmered at the base of waterfalls. In this tapestry of presence, animals lived as both inhabitants and interpreters of the unseen. The deer of Nara stood at the center of this understanding. Their presence became a reminder that the divine was not a distant force. It was near, attentive, and willing to walk beside humanity in gentle, quiet forms. They were living echoes of Take Mikazuchi's descent, embodiments of the bond between kami and land. And because of this, people sought meaning in their behavior, believing that their actions reflected currents of the spiritual world. When a deer approached a person with calm, it was seen as a blessing. When a deer turned its head sharply toward the forest, it signaled that a kami's attention had shifted. When deer gathered beneath certain trees, the priests would often take note, sensing that the spirits inhabiting those trees had awakened or stirred. What might seem like natural animal behavior to the unknowing eye carried layers of meaning to those who understood the depth of Shinto's connection to nature. This belief extended beyond Nara. Across Japan, animals were seen as vessels of spiritual truth. Foxes stood as messengers of Inari, guiding harvests and protecting shrines. Serpents were honored as guardians of springs and wells. Cranes symbolized longevity and divine blessing. Even creatures less commonly revered held spiritual resonance. Each animal had its place within the great web of nature and kami. The deer, however, remained uniquely cherished due to their connection to the founding myth of Nara's sacred landscape. They represented not only nature's beauty, but also the land's divine promise. When priests walked the shrine grounds, they did so with awareness that a deer's presence might indicate the shifting mood of the kami. And when ceremonies were performed, the deer sometimes drew near as though answering an ancient call woven into their lineage. There were tales, passed quietly from elder priests to novices, of deer appearing during moments of uncertainty. One spoke of a ritual that faltered decades ago when priests felt the presence of the kami recede. Just as doubt settled over them, a single deer approached the altar, bowing its head before stepping back into the forest. The priests understood this as reassurance, as if the kami had spoken through the movement of the creature, offering subtle guidance where words were unnecessary. Another story told of a child lost during a festival. The shrine grounds were vast, and panic spread quickly, but before the search could scatter into confusion, a deer stood at the edge of the path, looking back toward the deeper forest. When the adults followed, they found the child sitting safely beneath a cedar tree. Whether coincidence or intervention, the tale lived on as proof that the deer carried awareness beyond instinct. It is this blending of myth and lived reality that shaped Shinto understanding, not a rigid belief, but a fluid, breathing one. The sacred does not make itself known through spectacle. It reveals itself through patterns, gestures, pauses, and the subtle interactions of nature. In this worldview, animals mirror the intentions of the kami because they live closer to them. Their lives unfold in harmony with the land, unburdened by human thought and noise. This quiet purity is what makes them such powerful intermediaries. Humans pray with words, animals pray with presence. The deer, moving through forests with steps soft as the brushing of silk, carried messages simply by existing. Their calm reminded people of the tranquility that the kami wished to be reflected in human hearts. Their gentleness spoke of balance. Their trust, given freely, encouraged humility. And when they bowed, it was as though centuries of myth condensed into one graceful movement, offering a gesture of connection that required no explanation. Shrine architecture itself reflects this reverence. Torii gates stand as thresholds between worlds, not barriers, but invitations. When a deer passes beneath a torii, it is seen as a moment when the boundaries blur, when the spiritual and earthly realms meet in perfect ease. Priests sometimes pause when they witness this, offering silent acknowledgement. Visitors, even those unfamiliar with Shinto, feel the importance of the moment, sensing a shift in the atmosphere as if something unseen has drawn closer. Offerings made at shrines often honor both kami and their animal messengers. Rice, salt, and sake are placed before altars, but food for the deer is also considered a form of devotion. Children feed them with laughter and awe. Elders feed them with respect and memory. The deer's willingness to approach humans symbolizes the harmony Shinto strives to maintain, a world where nature does not retreat from human presence, but walks alongside it. In this sense, the sacred deer of Nara embody the ideal relationship between humanity and the living world. Their trust is a gift, not a guarantee. Their closeness reflects the balance that must be preserved. Any disruption, fear, harm, disrespect, would tear the delicate fabric woven through centuries. And so people walk gently in Nara, moving slowly, speaking softly, aware that they tread in a place where the divine is not merely believed in, but felt. The deer's significance also shaped rituals that extend beyond Nara. In some regions, animals visiting shrines were treated as signs of divine favor. Priests recorded sightings of particular creatures, interpreting their appearance as omens for harvests, weather, or the spiritual state of the community. While the deer of Nara gained the greatest fame, they were not alone in their role. Across mountains and coasts, throughout rice fields and forests, animals carried messages humans sought to understand. Yet Nara remained unique. Nowhere else did deer walk so freely among temples and pilgrims. Nowhere else did myth weave so seamlessly into daily life. Nowhere else did the bond between animal and kami feel so tangible. Visitors from other provinces wrote in their diaries about the uncanny peace of the place, how the deer seemed to watch over the people as much as the priests watched over the shrines. It was as if the land itself had chosen these creatures to stand between realms, to soften the edges of the invisible, to bring the kami's presence into the waking world. In later centuries, when Japan underwent transformations that reshaped cities, politics, and beliefs, the deer of Nara remained steady. Their sacred status was preserved through laws, customs, and collective memory. People who no longer practiced Shinto still honored the deer out of cultural reverence. Those unfamiliar with the legend still felt a quiet respect when encountering them, and those who sought spiritual connection found it easily in the deer's gentle gaze. For Shinto, belief is not enforced through commandments, it is felt through relationship. The deer represent one such relationship, a reminder that the divine reveals itself through life, through land, through creatures who move with an ease humans have long forgotten. When night settles over Nara Park and the lanterns dim, the deer wander the forest in patterns known only to them. They slip through shadows like whispers carried by the trees. They rest beneath branches that have seen generations come and go. And even in darkness, the feeling remains that the forest holds its breath around them, that invisible eyes watch with approval, that the boundary between worlds softens until it feels like a single realm. This is Shinto at its quietest, its purest, a belief carried not in doctrine, but in the soft steps of a deer moving through moonlit trees as though accompanied by the unseen. Long before the rhythms of modern Japan shaped themselves into the world we know today, the deer of Nara walked through centuries as quietly as drifting snow. Their presence did not fade with time. Instead, it strengthened, becoming a thread woven through each era's memory. Laws changed, rulers rose and fell, beliefs softened or sharpened with the turning of ages. Yet the deer remained untouched by the turmoil of human affairs, protected by reverence that flowed not from duty alone, but from devotion. As Nara blossomed into the ancient capital in the 8th century, its people held close the legend of Take Mikazuchi's descent. It was not a story told for entertainment. It was the heart around which the city's identity formed. The deer, believed to be the kami's messengers, moved freely through the palace grounds and temple courtyards. Officials, workers, priests, and pilgrims all stepped aside when the deer approached, bowing slightly as though greeting a familiar spirit. Even those who held high rank understood that the sacred walked beside them in forms both gentle and humble. Because of this belief, protection of the deer was not merely cultural, it became law. Early decrees declared the killing of a deer a crime of the gravest order, punishable by death. Such harshness stemmed not from fear of punishment, but from fear of spiritual imbalance. To harm a messenger of the kami was to break trust with the divine, to invite misfortune upon the land, to sever the connection that had guided Nara since its founding. And so the laws reflected the seriousness with which the city guarded its sacred guardians. The deer themselves seemed to recognize this bond. They wandered without fear through market streets and among the wooden structures of noble households. They grazed beside children playing in temple courtyards. They approached travelers with calm, as if sensing that their presence was not only tolerated, but cherished. Over time, the deer developed behaviors that mirrored the rhythm of human life in Nara, lingering near shrines during rituals, resting under torii gates during the heat of summer, gathering near lanterns during festivals when the city glowed with soft firelight. As the Heian period unfolded and Japan's political center shifted away from Nara, the capital's prominence changed, but its sacred identity did not. Even when emperors moved their courts elsewhere, Nara's shrines remained spiritual pillars, and the deer remained symbols of the land's enduring connection to the divine. Pilgrims from across the country traveled to Kasuga Taisha to offer prayers for protection, for guidance, for the quiet blessings of nature. And each pilgrim, without exception, treated the deer with gentle reverence. During these centuries, rituals grew around the animal's presence. Priests developed ceremonies meant to honor the harmony between humans and kami, often performed in sight of the deer who grazed nearby. Offerings of rice, salt, and sacred branches were made at altars, while the deer stood like soft silhouettes at the forest's edge. Even their shed antlers, gathered during certain seasons, were treated with respect, believed to carry spiritual residue from the divine lineage they embodied. It was during the medieval periods, when conflict swept through Japan in waves, that the deer's sacred status became a symbol of hope. While warriors clashed and villages shifted under the weight of unrest, Nara Park remained a sanctuary untouched by violence. Stories circulated of soldiers laying down their weapons when deer approached, reminded of the spiritual consequences of harm. In times when the world felt fractured and uncertain, the presence of the deer offered reassurance, proof that some bonds once formed could not be broken by upheaval. Even during episodes of famine, when people struggled for sustenance, laws remained unyielding. The deer could not be harmed, not even in desperation. Records tell of villagers offering what little they had to ensure the shrine grounds remained welcoming to the sacred animals. Their survival reflected not just reverence, but resilience, a community's willingness to uphold spiritual harmony above their own hardship. As centuries continued, the deer became woven into cultural expressions across Japan. Artists painted them on scrolls, their forms graceful and elongated, set against a backdrop of quiet forests or temple paths. Poets wrote verses describing the animals as living lanterns guiding humanity toward purity. Woodcarvers etched their silhouettes into shrine doors and ceremonial boxes. Even the antlers, naturally shed each year, became symbols of renewal, echoing the cycle of protection and rebirth inherent in Shinto belief. During the Edo period, when travel flourished, countless pilgrims arrived in Nara, eager to see the deer for themselves. Many kept journals describing their first encounter with the sacred guardians. They wrote of the calmness in the animal's gaze, of their unexpected gentleness, of the bowing gesture that had already become famous. Some described walking through the lantern-filled paths at dusk, only to find a deer standing quietly beside a stone marker, illuminated by the warm glow of evening light. Such moments felt like blessings, like stepping briefly into the realm the kami once walked. The Edo period also saw the strengthening of cultural protections around the deer. Local families, priests, and volunteers took responsibility for ensuring the animals were fed during harsh winters and droughts. Ceremonies honoring the deer's role in Nara's spiritual life became more elaborate, often involving music, dance, and offerings that reflected gratitude rather than mere obligation. One of the most enduring traditions from this era was the annual antler cutting ceremony, known today as shikeos and kirikabu, where deer were gently gathered and their antlers trimmed. While modern observers often view the ceremony as a safety measure, its origins lie in reverence. The ritual emphasized the idea that even sacred beings required gentle stewardship, a reminder that harmony with nature involves care, not merely admiration. Through all this, the deer continued to embody the qualities that first linked them to the divine: stillness, grace, watchfulness. They roamed the shrine grounds, not with the wild unpredictability of unprotected animals, but with the calm assurance of beings who belonged. Their lineage carried the weight of myth, and their presence carried the softness of an old promise, one passively kept through ages by the land and those who revered it. But reverence alone did not protect them forever. When Japan entered the era of modernization in the 19th century, the country underwent dramatic transformation. Western influences reshaped industries, clothing, architecture, and thought. Shrines were separated from temples, new laws were drafted, and political power concentrated in new centers. Amid this wave of change, ancient traditions softened, and for the first time in centuries, the sacred deer faced danger. During certain short periods of upheaval, old protections weakened. Some questioned the spiritual value of the deer. Others viewed them through the lens of practicality rather than myth. For a brief time, the sacred status that had preserved them for nearly 1,000 years flickered, and yet they endured. It was not the deer alone who brought back their protections. It was the people, the priests, the historians, the artists, the travelers whose hearts understood that the deer were more than animals. They were memory made living, myth made gentle. They were the soft echo of a world where nature was not something to overcome, but something to honor. And so, with renewed purpose, Nara restored the deer's protection, reaffirming their place as national treasures. The laws once again shielded them. The shrines strengthened their guardianship. The people returned to the rituals, to the offerings, to the reverence that had carried through centuries. And the deer, as though sensing the restoration of balance, continued to walk the land with the same calm they had carried since the age when a god descended upon their ancestors' back. Protection of the deer became more than tradition. It became an act of cultural preservation. Japan recognized that safeguarding these animals meant safeguarding a connection to its oldest beliefs, to the harmony that had shaped its identity since the earliest days of the Yamato court. And so, as modern Nara took shape, the deer remained at its heart, moving through city streets and shrine pathways with the timelessness of a story that refuses to fade. For reverence is not a relic of the past. It is a living thread carried through generations, held in the gentle steps of deer who walk through history as though guiding us toward a quieter, more sacred way of seeing the world. As Japan's history unfolded into eras of reform, restoration, and global change, the relationship between Nara's sacred deer and the people who lived beside them entered a new chapter, one shaped by both vulnerability and renewed devotion. The ancient protections that had once been unquestioned were tested by the modern world, yet the quiet grace of the deer remained a constant reminder of what the land had cherished for more than a millennium. During the early years of the Meiji period, when the separation of Shinto and Buddhism reshaped religious structures across the nation, the identity of shrines and temples was questioned, reordered, and rebuilt. Kasuga Taisha, long intertwined with Buddhist traditions at the nearby Kofukujai temple, faced dramatic reforms that threatened its spiritual equilibrium. For the deer, who had walked among monks and priests alike with no distinction between the traditions, the changes must have felt like shifts in the tone of the forest, subtle but present. Yet even as institutions were pulled apart by political decree, the deer continued their serene wanderings. Their presence reminded all who witnessed them that the sacred was not bound to buildings or titles. It lived in the land itself. And though the era's reforms briefly shook the foundations of traditional reverence, the people of Nara would not allow the deer, symbols of their ancient story, to be forgotten or dismissed. In truth, the deer offered something the changing world could not erase: continuity in a time of upheaval. Their soft steps through the forest paths, their gentle bows before approaching visitors, their calm presence beneath lantern-lit corridors, all of these gestures reinforced the spiritual truth that the land's sacred heritage endured beyond politics. The priests of Kasuga Taisha remained steadfast in their duty to protect the deer, continuing rituals, offerings, and quiet guardianship even as the nation surged into a new era. But sacredness does not shield against every storm. In the decades that followed, Japan confronted wars, scarcity, and shifting economies. During the Second World War, when resources were scarce and hunger shadowed the land, the deer faced their most dangerous trial in centuries. Some perished, not by cruelty, but by circumstance. Yet even in hardship, local families, monks, and shrine caretakers did what they could to shelter the surviving animals. After the war, when Japan began to rebuild itself from ruin, Nara turned once again to the deer as living symbols of resilience. Protecting them became a gesture of cultural rebirth, a quiet vow to preserve the beauty and harmony that had defined the land for over 1,000 years. Laws were reaffirmed, new protections were added, and education programs were created to teach children the significance of the sacred animals that walked among them. And the deer, as if sensing the renewed embrace, continued their gentle companionship with the city. By the mid-20th century, Nara Park had become one of the few places in Japan where ancient tradition remained not only intact, but fully alive. Tourists from newly connected global communities arrived, drawn by stories of deer who bowed to visitors and walked without fear through cathedral-like forests. They fed them crackers, laughed softly as the deer nudged their hands, and felt, often unexpectedly, a small moment of peace settle around them. For many travelers, the deer became their first tangible experience of Shinto belief. Even without knowing the details of Take Mikazuchi's myth, visitors sensed something sacred in the animal's presence. They saw the way priests observed the deer with quiet respect, the way locals stepped aside to give them passage, the way children bowed before approaching them. Without realizing it, travelers participated in a ritual that had been shaped by centuries. The deer, unchanged in their calm, carried these gestures into the modern age. As the decades passed and preservation efforts grew more formal, Nara's community developed systems to ensure the deer remained healthy and safe. Veterinarians worked alongside shrine caretakers. Volunteers monitored the herd during festivals and busy seasons. Researchers studied the behavior of the deer not out of curiosity alone, but to better support their continued well-being. The animals were not confined or domesticated. They remained free, unclaimed by any individual or organization, living embodiments of a shared cultural treasure. Their freedom became a symbol in itself. It represented the possibility that harmony between humans and nature could persist, even in a world that rushed forward too quickly for most ancient traditions to survive. Through the 20th century and into the 21st, the deer played a quiet but crucial role in the preservation of Nara's spiritual identity. They appeared in films, artwork, textbooks, and travel guides. Their images traveled beyond Japan's shores, becoming international icons of peace and gentle coexistence. Yet despite this widening attention, the deer remained as they had always been. Calm shadows beneath cedar branches, soft figures wandering between shrine pillars, living threads of a myth that refused to fade. When global tourism surged, new challenges emerged: litter, improper feeding, overly eager visitors. But once again, Nara responded not with hostility, but with guidance. Signs were added to explain how to approach the deer respectfully. Volunteers educated travelers. Priests emphasized the spiritual heritage behind the animal's presence. And through patient effort, balance was restored. Every morning before crowds gathered, the deer walked the paths in silence, their hooves clicking softly against stone. They grazed near the shrine gates, where priests swept fallen leaves and prepared offerings. They rested beneath lanterns that had flickered through countless nights, listening to the forest breathe. In those early hours, the connection between myth and reality felt unmistakable, an echo of the ancient world still alive beneath modern sky. Even during times of crisis, such as natural disasters or sudden downturns, the deer remained a symbol of quiet fortitude. Locals often said that as long as the deer wandered freely, Nara would remain spiritually protected. Whether taken literally or not, the sentiment reflected a truth deeply felt in the community. The deer were more than cultural artifacts. They were guardians of memory, companions of the land, reminders of the harmony Japan had cultivated through centuries. Small rituals emerged in the modern age, shaped by the gentle relationship between people and deer. Students visiting on school trips learned to bow before offering treats, discovering a moment of mutual respect in the deer's mirrored gesture. Families returned year after year to see the same herds. Elderly couples sat on benches watching the deer rest beneath azalea bushes, finding comfort in their steady presence. And through all these interactions, the belief remained intact, softened perhaps, but never broken, that these creatures carried something sacred within them. The deer also became symbols in contemporary Japanese art and literature. Their silhouettes appeared in children's books, in watercolor prints, in minimalist designs echoing traditional inkwork. Poets wrote of them as guardians of quiet thought. Photographers captured them in mist or snowfall, their forms blending with the ancient atmosphere of the park. Through such depictions, the deer continued to guide the imagination of all who encountered them. Some modern scholars questioned whether the deer still held the same sacred weight they once did. Yet one only had to watch the way visitors' expressions softened in their presence, or how locals instinctively bowed as a deer passed, to know that reverence had not faded, it had simply taken new form. For protection is not a barrier of stone or law. It is a living act of devotion carried through generations, and reverence is not bound to the past. It thrives in every gentle gesture that honors the balance between humans and the land. Thus, through centuries of change, conflict, renewal, and modern transformation, the deer of Nara remained exactly what they were in the days when Take Mikazuchi arrived upon their ancestors' back, quiet guardians of a sacred promise. And even now, as twilight falls over Nara Park, and the lanterns of Kasuga Taisha begin to glow beneath the canopy of ancient trees, the deer step softly through the dusk, carrying with them a timeless reminder that harmony, once cultivated with sincerity, can outlast empires, wars, and ages, and that the sacred endures not through power, but through gentleness. Morning arrives gently in Nara, not with sudden brightness, but with a slow unfolding of light that filters through branches older than dynasties. The forest wakes in soft breaths, shadows shifting like memories settling into place, and the deer rise with a grace that seems tied to the rhythm of the land. Their movements are simple yet ceremonial, as if each step, each pause, each breath belongs to a ritual older than spoken prayers. In these early hours, the daily interactions between people and deer begin, not choreographed, not commanded, but woven into the quiet heartbeat of the city. Before the first visitors reach the park, the deer wander through the mist that clings to the forest floor. Their hooves tap gently against stone paths still cool from the night. Some graze beneath the lanterns lining the walkway to Kasuga Taisha, their silhouettes merging with the soft orange glow that fades with dawn. Others linger near the wooden bridges that cross narrow streams, pausing to drink from waters that reflect the ancient boughs overhead. The priests of the shrine begin their morning tasks at this hour, sweeping fallen leaves, preparing offerings, and walking with the patience of those who understand they serve not only the kami, but the spirit of the land itself. As they move through the courtyards and pathways, the deer often wander beside them, curious yet calm. There is no fear, only familiarity, as though these beings have long participated in the rituals of dawn, lending their quiet presence to the work of purification and prayer. When the priests scatter salt at shrine entrances, some deer step forward to investigate, sniffing the ground before lowering their heads in brief stillness, mirroring the posture of reverence they have witnessed for centuries. The priests do not shoo them away. Instead, they pause, allowing the deer to be part of the moment, as though the land itself has chosen to join the ritual through their gentle bodies. As the morning deepens, the park begins to fill with people, locals walking with soft smiles, students on field trips, travelers who have crossed oceans to stand where ancient stories still breathe. The deer, accustomed to centuries of human companionship, approach without hesitation, yet never with greed or urgency. They move with the same dignified slowness that defines their presence in the forest, observing each visitor with calm, dark eyes that seem to understand far more than words can express. One of the most cherished interactions between deer and humans is the simple act of feeding. Vendors sell special crackers called shika senbei, created solely for the deer. Visitors hold them up with delight, and the deer respond in a gesture that has become famous around the world. They bow. The bow is not trained. It is instinct built through generations of soft exchange. When a visitor bows, the deer bow in return, sometimes once, sometimes twice, sometimes several times in a row, as if offering greetings shaped by centuries of reverence. The moment feels ceremonial, a shared gesture of mutual respect. Even those unfamiliar with the deeper history sense something sacred in the gesture, something gentle and pure. Children laugh as the deer nibble the crackers from their hands. Parents watch with quiet amazement. Elders, who have visited Nara since their youth, bow in return as if greeting old friends. And in these moments, the centuries dissolve. What remains is a gesture that bridges myth and daily life, soft, simple, yet heavy with symbolic meaning. But feeding is only one facet of the deer's daily rituals. Throughout the day, they gather in small groups, moving from one part of the park to another with subtle coordination. Some rest beneath the sprawling branches of Zelkova trees, their bodies forming small circles of warmth and companionship. Others wander near the lakes, dipping their muzzles into the water, or watching the ripples move across the surface like drifting prayers. The deer's interactions with people often feel like echoes of ancient customs. When they step aside to let someone pass on a narrow path, it resembles an unspoken courtesy taught by the shrine itself. When they pause before a torii gate, lowering their heads as they cross beneath it, the movement mirrors the humility expected of humans entering sacred space. When they gather in the shade near temple bells, as the sound resonates through the forest, it feels as if they are listening not to noise, but to memory. Some deer frequent particular shrines or gardens, almost as though they have adopted territories of spiritual significance. Visitors who return to Nara year after year often recognize certain deer by their gentle demeanor or distinctive markings. They share stories of a deer who always rests beside the same stone lantern, or another who follows the same morning path from the forest to the shrine steps, as if performing a pilgrimage of its own. The bowing behavior, while often endearing to visitors, carries deeper meaning in the context of Nara's spiritual history. The bow is not merely a request for food, it is a gesture that reflects centuries of coexistence. It mirrors the behavior of priests and pilgrims, the rhythm of offering and receiving, the flow of respect that defines the heart of Shinto belief. This silent exchange between deer and humans becomes a ritual in itself, one that expresses the harmony sought by both worlds. As afternoon light filters through the trees, creating patterns that shift like breathing shadows, the deer often retreat to quieter areas of the park. They gather in meadows where wildflowers bloom between stones, resting with their legs tucked beneath their bodies. Their stillness brings a hush to the landscape. Visitors passing by lower their voices, sensing instinctively that they are in the presence of something that deserves gentleness. During festival days, when the shrines are adorned with offerings and lanterns glow in long rows, the deer move differently. They walk more slowly, more deliberately, as though attuned to the deeper resonance of the rituals taking place. Some approach the shrine steps and pause, watching the preparations with curious solemnity. Others remain at the edges, standing like silent witnesses beneath the canopy of lights. In the evenings, after the crowds diminish, the deer reclaim the pathways with quiet dignity. The soft sounds of their movement, hooves tapping gently on stone, leaves rustling beneath their bodies, blend with the night. The forest cools, the lanterns flicker, and the deer walk through the dim light with the ease of beings who know the land better than any map or memory could describe. When the priests perform their final rituals of the day, some deer gather near the courtyard, not intruding, but watching. Their presence feels ceremonial, as though they too play a role in the closing of the shrine's daily cycle. And in a way, they do. For the shrine, the forest, and the deer are bound together by a relationship that has shaped each day for over 1,000 years. Even in modern times, when visitors arrive with cameras and smartphones, the daily rituals remain unchanged. The deer continue to wander freely, their gestures gentle, their presence calming. They bow, they rest, they graze. They share space with strangers as though extending an ancient invitation to be part of something older than understanding. And through these small interactions, Nara remains a place where myth breathes softly in the rhythms of everyday life, carried not through grand ceremonies, but through the quiet companionship of animals who have long walked the threshold of the divine. For the deer do not perform miracles. They do not speak. They do not command awe through grandeur. Instead, they remind us, in the gentlest possible ways, that reverence is found in the smallest moments, and that the sacred often walks beside us in silence. As daylight stretches toward its golden edge, the rhythm of Nara shifts once again. Afternoon softens into evening, and the deer begin to move with a deeper sense of ease, as though the heat and noise of the day were nothing more than a passing cloud. Their steps seem slower, their breaths gentler, their gazes touched by a quiet awareness that dusk always brings. It is at this hour that their interactions with the land and with people take on a tone even more sacred than in the morning sunlight. Visitors strolling through the park often find themselves pausing without knowing why. Perhaps it is the way the deer gather in small groups beneath the canopy, or the way shadows stretch long across moss-covered stones. Perhaps it is the softening of sound, the birdsong thinning, the murmurs of the crowd dimming, the forest reclaiming its natural hush. In this quieter world, the deer become not simply animals, but living symbols of peace shaped by centuries of reverence. Some deer move toward the shrine corridors, weaving through the line of stone lanterns that guide the way to Kasuga Taisha. Their hooves tap softly against the ground, echoing with the faintest rhythm, as though marking an ancient procession that continues night after night. Others wander toward the open meadows, where families settle briefly to watch the sky change colors. Children offer the last of their crackers, bowing with the same care they showed in the morning. The deer bow in return, sometimes with an almost exaggerated sincerity, as though acknowledging the day's final exchange of kindness. As the forest cools, the deer groom one another with slow, affectionate movements. Mothers lick their fawns' foreheads, nudging them gently toward shaded places where they can rest. Young deer play in small bursts of energy, kicking up the light dust of the paths before calming once more. These interactions feel like rituals in themselves, expressions of a bond that extends beyond survival, shaped by the soft language of companionship. By evening, the tourists drift away, and Nara begins to resemble the ancient world it once was. The deer step into the open spaces left behind, reclaiming the quiet with a familiarity that suggests they have always belonged more fully to the night. Some approach the low stone walls of shrines, resting their heads atop them, as though listening to the stillness within. Others settle near the torii gates, their bodies silhouetted against the fading light. They watch the world with unhurried calm, patient as the trees that surround them. There is something deeply comforting in the deer's evening presence. Their stillness feels like balm to the spirit, an invitation to breathe more slowly, to let go of the distractions of the day. And for those who wander the park in these late hours, the experience often lingers in memory. The soft footstep of a deer passing by in near silence, the warmth of their gaze, the sense of standing beside a creature that carries centuries of quiet meaning. As night draws nearer, the shrines begin their closing rituals. Priests move through the grounds with lanterns in hand, casting small circles of light that shimmer against wooden beams and moss. The deer watch from a distance, recognizing the cadence of a ceremony they have witnessed hundreds of times. Some even follow the priests briefly, their heads tilted with gentle curiosity. The priests sometimes pause to let a deer pass, offering a small nod of acknowledgement before continuing their work. It is an exchange shaped by familiarity and mutual respect, a dance between human reverence and natural grace. During festival seasons, the deer's interactions become even more profound. When thousands of lanterns are lit, Illuminating the forest with an otherworldly glow, the deer step through the patterns of light like beings born of flame and shadow. Their bodies cast elongated shapes across the ground, merging with the glow of each lantern, creating scenes that seem carved from myth. People whisper in awe as deer wander near them, the presence of the animals transforming the festival into something more than celebration. It becomes communion. And as musicians play ancient melodies on flutes and drums, the deer often pause near the sound, ears flicking, bodies still. The music seems to bind them to the moment, as though they recognize the echoes of rituals performed long before modern instruments arrived. These moments, stolen from time, capture the essence of Nara's sacred harmony. Humans, animals, and the unseen world converging in shared stillness. During quiet seasons, when fewer visitors walk the paths, the deer's daily rituals become even more intimate. Forest trails stretch undisturbed, and the deer move through them like soft wind, their forms blending with the muted tones of winter or the rich greens of summer. They graze at the edges of shrines, often leaving delicate hoofprints in the soil near sacred stones. These marks, though simple, feel almost like offerings, temporary impressions of their presence left for the land to remember. In recent years, researchers and caretakers have observed how strongly the deer rely on their bond with both the land and the people. Mothers teach their fawns to bow, nudging them toward visitors with the gentlest encouragement. Older deer lead their younger companions towards safe resting areas. The herd behaves almost like a community shaped by ritual rhythm, a collective aware of its role within the park's cultural fabric. Even their behavior at night carries a pattern of subtle beauty. As darkness settles, the deer gather in quiet groups, choosing places of safety known to their lineage. Some rest near waterways, where the sound of flowing water mixes with the night breeze. Others settle beneath towering trees whose branches creak softly overhead. Their bodies relax into the earth, and their breathing grows slow and steady, blending with the cadence of the sleeping forest. But not all deer sleep at once. A few remain alert, watching the shadows, listening to every whisper of movement. This silent guardianship has long intrigued observers. Some say it reflects instincts shaped by centuries of natural caution. Others believe it mirrors the role of messengers, creatures who move between worlds and remain attentive to shifts unseen by human eye. Whatever the reason, their watchful presence adds an ancient depth to the forest night. When dawn approaches once more, the cycle begins again. The deer rise with the first touch of morning light, stretching their necks, shaking dew from their coats, stepping into the mist that rolls across the grassy fields. The air smells of earth and cedar. Birds call softly from the branches above. And the deer prepare to greet a new day, carrying with them the quiet grace that has defined their existence for generations. Their interactions with people, bowing, grazing near walkways, sharing space with reverence, continue as naturally as the turning of the seasons. The deer do not perform for admiration. They live within a rhythm shaped by trust and tradition. And the people who meet them feel something shift within themselves, touched by the presence of animals who carry both gentleness and myth in their steps. Through these daily rituals, Nara becomes more than a park or a historical site. It becomes a living sanctuary, a place where ancient harmony thrives in each small interaction. Visitors return again and again to experience the feeling of standing beside a deer in silence, a moment that bridges centuries, drawing the present into the ancient world with a single breath. For in the deer's quiet companionship, the sacred becomes real. Not through spectacle, not through miracle, but through stillness shared between two beings who understand each other without words. And it is in these unspoken moments that Nara's deepest truth is felt. That reverence lies not in monuments, but in the gentle rituals that unfold every single day. In the quiet weave of the modern world, where cities rise like steel forests and digital voices echo louder than the wind, Nara remains a place where the ancient breathes gently through the present. Its temples stand not as relics, but as living guardians. Its lanterns glow with the same soft warmth that guided pilgrims centuries ago. And through this timeless landscape, the deer move with an ease untouched by the rush of modern life. Their presence is a reminder that some bonds, once formed, do not fade with the turning of eras. They simply find new ways to remain. For many people visiting Nara today, the deer are their first encounter with a living myth. They approach the animals with curiosity, expecting simple creatures, and find instead beings who move with quiet purpose, as though carrying memory on their backs. Children run toward them with wide-eyed delight, while elders approach with soft steps and reverent nods. The deer greet both with the same gentle calm, bowing their heads in gestures shaped by generations of coexistence. In this way, the deer have become ambassadors, not just of Nara's story, but of a philosophy rooted in harmony between humans and the natural world. Even those who come unaware of the legend find themselves touched by its presence. A visitor who expected a simple park encounter leaves feeling as though they brushed against something deeper, something that lingers quietly even after they've departed. The modern legacy of Nara's deer is not built on spectacle, but on continuity. Their quiet lives echo a 1,000-year relationship, one that endures even as Japan transforms around them. Tourists arrive with cameras and smartphones, but the deer respond not to technology, only to gentleness. They bow for treats, wander among crowds without fear, and settle in shaded places when the day grows warm. They behave with the same dignity they carried in the age of emperors, as though the centuries between then and now were layers of breath, soft and weightless. In this modern age, their legacy extends beyond reverence. It becomes resilience. Nara Park is no untouched wilderness. It exists in the heart of a living city, bordered by roads, shops, and homes. And yet, the deer move through it as if the land still belonged only to forest and shrine. Their ability to adapt has become part of their story. They interface with contemporary life with a gentleness that encourages humans to slow down, to meet the world on softer terms. Throughout the park, signs remind visitors how to treat the deer. Do not startle them, do not feed them inappropriate foods, offer crackers with kindness. These reminders are not merely rules. They are instructions for participating in a living tradition, for entering a space where humans are guests and the deer are the quiet hosts. The people of Nara have embraced this role of stewardship with devotion. Local volunteers monitor the herds, ensuring their health and safety. Veterinarians treat injured deer with the same care afforded to cherished companions. Students learn the legend in school, understanding from a young age why the deer wander freely, why they deserve respect, why they matter. This intergenerational care shapes the modern legacy as much as the myth itself. Even as Japan grapples with modern challenges, urban expansion, climate shifts, changing demographics, the deer remain protected with unwavering commitment. Municipal efforts focus on balancing tourism with conservation. Researchers study the herds not as anomalies but as living heritage, and the shrines continue to honor the deer in quiet prayer, acknowledging their role in carrying the essence of the land. One of the most striking aspects of the deer's modern presence is their unbroken trust. They walk through crowded festival streets without fear. They approach people with steady calm, bowing for offerings. They rest beneath the vermilion pillars of Kasuga Taisha as comfortably as they rest under a cedar tree. Trust is not easily earned, yet the deer have carried it through centuries, shaped by laws, faith, and the gentle habits of the people who dwell beside them. Visitors often describe a moment they did not expect. A deer approaching slowly, cautiously, and then pausing to bow. It is a small gesture, simple and quiet, but it carries the weight of 1,000 years. It bridges the gap between eras, turning a modern encounter into a thread woven from history. The bow feels like a conversation between past and present, offered through grace rather than words. It invites reflection, an opportunity to stand still, breathe deeply, and honor the subtle ways nature speaks. Because of such moments, the deer have become symbols not only of Shinto tradition, but of kindness itself. Their presence softens the atmosphere of the city, inviting people to walk slower, to observe more carefully, to approach with humility. Even those who come only for photographs often leave with a sense of peace they did not expect. But the modern legacy of Nara's sacred deer is not limited to cultural symbolism. It carries ecological significance as well. The deer's presence shapes the growth of forest plants, influencing the balance of the ecosystem. Their paths carve gentle lines through the landscape, maintaining corridors that connect parts of the forest. Their grazing helps control undergrowth, creating natural spaces that benefit countless species living within the park. Researchers studying Nara's biodiversity often point to the deer as key participants in the environment, not passive inhabitants. Their movements, habits, and feeding patterns contribute to the forest's rhythm, just as the forest shapes theirs. This mutual influence forms an ecological harmony that has lasted far longer than any modern conservation framework. Yet, with this legacy comes responsibility. Tourism, if unmanaged, can overwhelm the land and stress the deer. Uninformed visitors may feed them harmful foods or misinterpret their behavior. That is why caretakers and shrine officials work tirelessly to educate the public, protecting not only the deer's physical well-being, but the peaceful relationship that defines Nara's identity. There have been times when global events tested this balance. During periods when tourism paused and streets grew quiet, the deer wandered farther into the city, seeking the familiarity of interaction. Locals stepped in with increased care, ensuring the animals did not suffer in the absence of the crowds they had grown accustomed to. These moments revealed both the vulnerability and the resilience of the sacred bond, and the willingness of the community to preserve it. Today, the deer appear in documentaries, children's books, and international media. Their image circulates far beyond Japan, inspiring a sense of wonder in those who have never visited. They have become symbols of harmony, simplicity, and the possibility of coexistence. And yet, for all their global recognition, they remain deeply rooted in the soil of Nara, shaped by the same myth that guided their ancestors. For the deer, legacy is not a concept, it is a way of being. They walk the land with an ancient quietness, unaware of the admiration they receive, content simply to exist in the space where myth and daily life touch. As evening falls, the lanterns of Kasuga Taisha flicker to life, casting soft, amber circles on the paths. The deer drift toward the glow, their forms merging with the warm light. Some lie beside the lantern bases as though guarding ancient memories. Others wander between the trees, shadows blending with shadows. Their presence at dusk feels like a ritual in itself, a continuation of a story that has never needed telling because it has always been lived. And those who walk through the park at this hour understand, even without knowing exactly why, that the deer are far more than animals. They are keepers of calm, bearers of legacy, living threads in a tapestry woven from faith, history, and the gentle patience of nature. In their quietness, the modern world finds a moment of rest, and in their presence, it finds a window into the sacred softness that shaped Japan's earliest dreams. As the world stepped deeper into the digital age, where connections span continents in the blink of an eye, and the pace of life grows ever quicker, Nara's sacred deer remained unchanged in their quiet way of moving through the world. Their presence stood as a reminder that not all progress needs to be loud, and not all history needs to be sealed behind glass. Some stories continue not because they are preserved in archives, but because they walk beside us, breathing softly under ancient trees. In the early mornings, when the streets of Nara are just beginning to stir with the day's first sounds, the deer emerge from their nighttime shelters in the forest. They stretch, shake dew from their fur, and step onto paths that have carried pilgrims for over 1,000 years. Their silhouettes appear through the mist like gentle phantoms, unhurried and unaware of the significance humans attach to them. And yet, their movements shape the rhythm of the waking city. As modern residents make their way to shops, offices, and schools, it is not uncommon to see a deer standing calmly by the roadside, watching with mild curiosity. Drivers slow instinctively, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Cyclists weave carefully around resting deer, offering small bows as they pass. Children on their way to school pause to touch the soft fur of a familiar deer that frequents their neighborhood, the same deer their parents once fed crackers to when they were young. This seamless blend of sacred and everyday life forms one of Nara's most enduring legacies, a community shaped not by removing the wild from the city, but by living gently alongside it. Tourism remains a significant part of that legacy. People travel from all corners of the world to witness what they have heard only in whispers or seen in photographs. The deer who bow, the deer who roam freely, the deer who embody a story older than their own lifetimes. Upon arrival, visitors often find themselves unexpectedly moved, not by spectacle, but by the serenity of the encounter. It is difficult not to feel a shift when a deer steps toward you with trusting eyes, lowers its head in a graceful bow, and waits with quiet patience. Some visitors cry softly, surprised by how the moment settles in their hearts. Others laugh with a kind of childlike wonder. Many leave with photos or videos, but the deeper memory often lies in the stillness of the exchange, the way time seems to slow, the way the presence of the deer invites a gentleness rarely found in bustling cities. Yet increased global attention also brings challenges. The deer, though sacred, are vulnerable to the pressures of tourism. Improper feeding, overcrowding, unintentional stress. This is where Nara's modern legacy truly takes shape, not only in celebration of the deer, but in mindful protection. Local organizations have emerged to ensure the deer remain healthy. Teams of caretakers monitor the herds throughout the day, watching for signs of illness or injury. They ensure that visitors understand how to interact respectfully, handing out guidance notes during peak seasons. They work with veterinarians who treat the deer when necessary, blending scientific care with cultural reverence. The efforts extend beyond physical well-being. Researchers study the deer's behavior patterns, social structures, and feeding habits to better understand how human interaction affects them. Some findings reveal the deep adaptability of the deer, who have learned to navigate the complexities of modern life without losing their innate calm. Others highlight the importance of continued education, reminding visitors that sacredness does not grant immunity from harm. Still, the deer maintain their steady grace. They walk through crowded streets during festivals, slipping between groups of visitors as though moving through waves. They rest beside cherry trees in spring, petals drifting onto their backs like soft blessings. They stand beneath maple branches in autumn, their fur blending with the warm reds and golds. In winter, when snow dusts the roofs of Kasuga and the forest grows quiet beneath a pale sky, the deer gather tightly for warmth. Their breaths rise like small clouds, merging with the cold air. The sight carries a certain purity, a reminder that despite centuries of change, the deer remain deeply tied to the land, living embodiments of a world that values harmony over dominance. What is perhaps most remarkable is how the deer shape the lives of the people around them. Residents grow accustomed to keeping their garbage secured, knowing the deer might investigate if left unattended. Gardeners plant deer-resistant shrubs around certain homes, but leave offerings of leaves and grass near public pathways. Teachers use the deer as examples in lessons on ecology, culture, and compassion. Local artists sketch their forms, capturing the subtle emotions carried in their posture and gaze. And visitors, whether they come from neighboring prefectures or distant countries, often return home with a newfound sense of peace. Stories circulate of travelers who arrived feeling hurried or distracted, only to find themselves slowing down as they walked through the park. They speak of pausing for the first time in months, simply to breathe and watch a deer nibble clover beneath the lanterns. They speak of feeling reconnected with something quiet inside themselves. In this way, the deer's modern legacy is not confined to Nara. It travels, with every photograph, every memory, every soft moment shared between human and animal. It travels with the idea that coexistence is possible, that sacredness can still be found in the everyday, that gentleness has not vanished from the world. Even during times when travel slows or the world faces uncertainty, the deer continue to walk their paths. During recent global events that reduced tourism dramatically, the deer wandered farther into the city, exploring spaces that were usually filled with people. Locals saw them resting near shop entrances, walking across quiet roads, standing in the center of parks long emptied of crowds. Far from chaos, the deer moved with the same unshaken calm, as though reminding the city that no matter how unpredictable life becomes, nature remembers its own pace. Residents responded with increased care, bringing food when necessary, respecting the expanded territories the deer reclaimed during those quiet months. It was a powerful reminder that the relationship between Nara and its deer is not dependent on human attention. It is a partnership that adjusts with time, grounded in compassion forged through centuries. In the years since, tourism has returned, but the lessons of that period remain. The city continues to balance celebration with stewardship. New signs emphasize safety and respect. Local initiatives promote sustainable tourism. And shrine caretakers, who have watched over the deer longer than anyone, continue to guide visitors gently, reminding them that they walk through a living story. The deer themselves remain unaware of the global admiration they inspire. They rise with the morning sun, graze in grassy fields, wander beneath temple eaves, bow for treats, rest in the cool shade of ancient trees. They live their lives with a simplicity that feels almost sacred, teaching without intending to teach, offering peace without expecting anything in return. Their modern legacy is exactly this, a quiet reminder that the world can be kind, that ancient harmony can survive the rush of modern time, that humans can still walk gently alongside the beings who share their land. As night falls once more over Nara, the deer return to the forest. Lanterns flicker in long rows. The air cools and deepens. The trees sway in a rhythm shaped by centuries of whispered prayers, and the deer melt into the shadows, not disappearing, but returning to the realm where myth and reality meet. Tomorrow, they will walk the paths again. Tomorrow, they will bow to visitors, graze beneath temple roofs, and continue the story woven through generations. Tomorrow, they will remind the world, quietly, faithfully, that sacredness does not belong only to the past. It belongs to every moment when life is met with reverence, every gentle gesture, every soft step taken with awareness of the earth beneath our feet. And in this way, the deer of Nara carry their ancient legacy into the modern world, not as relics, but as living guides showing us how to be present, how to be gentle, and how to remember that harmony once found can endure forever. Night settles slowly over Nara, as though the sky itself wishes not to disturb the quiet stories held beneath its stars. Lanterns dim one by one, their glow softening into ember-colored breaths that drift across the forest paths. And in this tender hush, the sacred deer return to the places where shadows gather like folded memories. They move with unhurried grace, hooves brushing against the earth, breath rising in faint clouds that glimmer beneath moonlight. The forest welcomes them home, branches swaying in a rhythm older than any shrine, older than any written word. Here, among cedar trunks and moss-coated stones, The world feels suspended, held gently between the past and the present. It is in these hours, when the noise of the day has faded, that the true spirit of Nara reveals itself. Not in ceremony, not in crowds, but in the simple elegance of creatures who have never forgotten how to live alongside the sacred. The deer rest in small clusters beneath the trees, their bodies warm against the cool earth. Some tilt their heads to the sound of distant bells. Others close their eyes, as if listening to dreams only they can hear, and perhaps they are, for the land remembers through them. The myth of a god descending upon a deer's back, the centuries of reverence, the soft rituals formed between people and nature. They linger in every quiet breath, in every gentle bow, in every footstep taken beneath the ancient canopy. As the forest darkens, a kind of peace settles over everything, a peace shaped not by silence alone, but by harmony, the kind that grows when humans choose to live with gentleness. It is the peace of lanterns burning low, of wind moving through leaves, of deer wandering without fear. A peace that reminds us that the sacred is not something distant or unreachable. It is here, in the quiet moments, waiting to be noticed. And when dawn comes again, spilling pale light across the paths, the deer will rise once more. They will step into the new day with the same calm they have carried through centuries, guiding anyone who walks beside them toward a softer way of seeing the world. For in Nara, the story never truly ends. It breathes. It listens. It continues, in the rustle of leaves, in the echo of hooves, in the gentle presence of creatures who carry the memory of the divine with every step. And as long as they walk these sacred forests, the ancient harmony of this land will never fade. Some beings do not wander the world. They wander the boundary between spirit and soil. And in Nara's quiet paths, the deer look back at you, as if carrying a message older than memory.